Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever felt like you were climbing a ladder only to find out the top rung was reserved for someone else? Today we are diving into a story called the Nepotism Wall. Imagine this. You have given 10 years of your life to one company. You were the first one in, the last one out, and you know the business better than anyone. You've earned the upcoming promotion. But then the CEO walks in with his son, a fresh college graduate who doesn't know a spreadsheet from a menu. And just like that, the job you worked a decade for is handed to him. In this lesson, we are going to explore the language of frustration, how to describe corporate setbacks, real-life problem solving, what do you do when hard work isn't enough, and key vocabulary, terms like glass ceiling, entitlement, and resignation. Pay close attention to the expressions we use. Let's get started with Chapter 1, The Decade of Dust. The fluorescent lights of the accounting firm hummed with a familiar, sterile buzz as Marcus entered the building at 6:30 a.m. For 3,665 days, exactly 10 years, this had been his sanctuary. He knew the rhythmic click of the turnstiles, the specific groan of the elevator as it rose to the 12th floor, and the exact amount of sugar the morning security guard, Arthur, liked in his coffee. Marcus sat at his desk, which was a model of meticulous organization. To his left sat a stack of Employee of the Month plaques, now slightly tarnished by the passage of time. To his right was a framed photo of his family, the primary reason he had stayed late every night for a decade. He wasn't just a senior analyst, he was the fixer. When a client was angry or a spreadsheet was broken, it landed on Marcus's desk. Everyone in the office, from the interns to the janitors, knew the news was coming. The vice president of operations was retiring, and the vacancy was wide open. Marcus had the seniority, the numbers, and the unwavering respect of his peers. He had spent 10 years building a ladder out of hard work and late nights. As the sun finally began to hit the glass windows of the skyscraper, Marcus took a slow sip of black coffee. He felt a rare sense of peace. He believed in the merit of the system. He believed that if you gave a company your best years, they would give you a future. He was ready to climb that final rung. Monday morning arrived with an unusual energy in the office. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, walked through the glass doors with a young man trailing behind him like a quiet shadow. The young man was Julian, the CEO's only son, who had tossed his graduation cap in the air only 4 weeks ago. He wore a navy blue Italian suit that looked far too expensive for a Monday morning in accounting. Mr. Sterling stopped at Marcus's desk, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, you're the best we have, so I want you to do me a personal favor," the CEO said with a wide, practiced smile. "Julian needs to understand the soul of this company before he takes on his new responsibilities." Marcus felt a small prick of unease, but he nodded professionally. "I'd be happy to show him the ropes, sir," Marcus replied, clearing a space on his desk. For the next week, Julian sat in a leather chair, scrolling through his phone while Marcus explained complex tax codes. Julian didn't take notes. Instead, he asked where the best sushi in the city was located. He struggled to open a basic PDF and laughed when he couldn't remember the names of the firm's biggest clients. Marcus told himself it was just a temporary hurdle, a courtesy to the boss. He assumed Julian was just passing through on his way to a junior role in another department. But as the week ended, Marcus noticed Julian wasn't moving his things. He was measuring the square footage of the empty VP office. The golden shadow wasn't there to learn. He was there to claim the territory Marcus had spent a decade defending. The air in the conference room felt thick and heavy, like the atmosphere before a summer storm. Marcus sat at the long mahogany table, his notebook open and his pen ready to take notes on the new departmental structure. Every senior manager was present, whispering in low tones while looking toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Suddenly, the doors swung open, and Mr. Sterling walked in with a look of immense pride on his face. Julian followed closely behind, adjusting his silk tie and looking at the ceiling as if he were bored by the gravity of the moment. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Sterling began, his voice booming with authority. "As you know, this company was built on the values of legacy and vision." Marcus felt his heart race. He thought about the 10 years of data, the late-night audits, and the loyalty he had shown. "After careful consideration," the CEO continued, "I am thrilled to announce our new Vice President of Operations." He paused for effect, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder. "My son, Julian, will be taking the lead to bring a youthful perspective to our aging systems." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a dozen hearts sinking at the exact same time. Marcus stared at his notebook, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white. Julian gave a half-hearted wave and said, "I'm looking forward to disrupting things around here." No one cheered, but everyone eventually began to clap, a slow, rhythmic sound that felt more like a funeral march than a celebration. Marcus looked up and met Mr. Sterling's eyes, hoping to see a hint of guilt. Instead, he saw only the cold, hard wall of nepotism standing tall between him and the future he had earned.
The transition was not a smooth handoff. It was a total collapse of efficiency. Julian's new office was twice the size of Marcus's desk, but it remained remarkably empty of actual work. Instead of reviewing the quarterly audits, Julian spent his mornings vibe-checking the break room and ordering expensive ergonomic chairs. However, the work didn't just disappear. It flowed downhill, landing directly back on Marcus's shoulders. "Hey Marcus, my dad said you're the wizard with these numbers," Julian said, dropping a massive file on Marcus's desk one Tuesday afternoon. "I've got a lunch meeting at the golf club, so can you just make this look professional by 4 p.m.? Marcus looked at the file. It was the entire operational budget, and Julian hadn't even opened the first page. For the next month, Marcus became a ghostwriter for a vice president who didn't understand the difference between gross income and net income. He stayed until 9 p.m., fixing Julian's creative typos and correcting math that a middle schooler would have spotted. The rest of the team noticed the injustice. They saw Marcus entering the VP's office to deliver completed reports that Julian would later sign as his own. The cleanup crew consisted of one man, Marcus, working 2 jobs for the salary of 1. Every time Julian received a compliment from the board for a brilliant report, Marcus felt a piece of his passion for the company die. He realized that he wasn't just being passed over for a promotion, he was being used as the battery to power someone else's success. The wall wasn't just blocking his path anymore, it was starting to crush him under the weight of someone else's incompetence. The breaking point didn't come with a shout, it came with a quiet, calculated click of a mouse. Marcus arrived at the office at 8:59 a.m., not a second earlier, and left exactly at 5 p.m. For a decade, he had been the company's safety net, catching every mistake before it hit the floor. But this week, Marcus decided to step back and let the laws of gravity take over. When Julian sent an urgent email at 5:15 p.m. asking for a quick fix on a client presentation, Marcus didn't reply. The next morning, the office felt different. The air was charged with a tense, awkward energy. Julian's vibe checking was no longer working because the actual work was starting to pile up like a mountain of unwashed dishes. Without Marcus's invisible hand patching the holes, the department began to wobble under the pressure of real deadlines. Meetings were delayed, emails went unreturned, and the usual rhythm of the office turned into a chaotic scramble. Marcus sat at his desk, completing his own assigned tasks with perfect precision, but he offered nothing more. He stopped speaking up in brainstorming sessions and stopped correcting Julian's frequent, embarrassing mispronunciations of industry terms. The silent rebellion was confusing to Julian, who assumed Marcus would always be there to provide the answers. "Is everything okay, Marcus? You seem less proactive lately," Julian asked, leaning against the cubicle wall with a worried frown. Marcus looked up, gave a polite but distant smile, and said, "I'm just focusing strictly on my job description, Julian." For the first time in 10 years, Marcus wasn't the engine of the company. He was just an observer watching the machine smoke. He realized that by doing everything, he had made it impossible for the CEO to see how little his son was actually doing.
The crisis that Marcus had anticipated arrived on a humid Thursday afternoon. The firm's largest client, a multinational tech giant, threatened to pull their contract after Julian missed a critical compliance deadline. Mr. Sterling didn't send a memo. He walked straight to Marcus's cubicle, his face a shade of panicked red. "Marcus, my office, now," the CEO barked, not waiting for a response. Inside the executive suite, the atmosphere was frantic, with Julian sitting in the corner, looking uncharacteristically small. "The client is furious," Mr. Sterling said, pacing the floor. "Julian says there was a technical glitch, but we need a miracle." He stopped and looked Marcus in the eye, his voice dropping to a pleading, paternal tone. "I need you to take over the account temporarily, fix the filing, and tell the client that Julian was overseeing your work." Marcus felt a cold sensation in his chest. It wasn't fear, but a sudden, sharp clarity. He realized the CEO wasn't asking him to save the company. He was asking him to lie to protect a family legacy. "Sir, I've hit a ceiling here," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady and devoid of the usual eagerness to please. "I can fix the filing, but I cannot give Julian credit for work he doesn't understand and didn't perform." The silence that followed was different from the boardroom announcement. It was the sound of a decade-long bridge beginning to burn. Mr. Sterling stared at him, realizing for the first time that his most loyal soldier was no longer taking orders. The glass ceiling hadn't just stopped Marcus's growth, it had finally cracked under the pressure of the truth. After the confrontation in the CEO's office, Marcus knew his days at the firm were numbered. Instead of falling into despair, he spent his evenings meticulously organizing a digital exit vault. He began documenting every project he had spearheaded, every dollar he had saved the company, and every error he had quietly fixed for Julian. While Julian was busy deleting emails he didn't understand, Marcus was building a comprehensive paper trail of his own value. One evening, while looking through the shared drive for an old contract, Marcus stumbled upon a hidden folder labeled Restructuring. Inside, he found a draft of the company's 5-year plan, written entirely in Mr. Sterling's private notes. The plan was clear. Marcus was never meant to move up. He was intended to be the permanent support system for Julian's career. The document even suggested cutting Marcus's bonus to offset the cost of Julian's inflated vice president's salary. Seeing the cold math of his own exploitation on the screen changed something deep inside Marcus. He didn't get angry, he got organized, realizing that loyalty to a company that doesn't value you is just a slow form of self-destruction. He printed the documents, saved his performance reviews, and polished his portfolio until it shined. The paper trail wasn't just a collection of files, it was the evidence Marcus needed to prove to himself that he was far too big for this small, family-owned pond. He realized that while they owned the building, he owned the expertise that kept the lights on.
On a rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in over 3,000 days. He called in sick. He traded his usual practical work jacket for his sharpest charcoal suit and drove across the city to a skyscraper that dwarfed his current office. He was meeting with Apex Consulting, the primary competitor of his firm and a company known for its ruthless meritocracy. As he sat in the lobby, Marcus felt a strange mix of guilt and adrenaline, but the guilt vanished the moment he was called into the boardroom. The partners at Apex didn't ask about his family or his loyalty. They asked about his data, his strategies, and his 10-year track record. "We've been watching your work from a distance for a long time, Marcus," the senior partner said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "We were surprised you stayed where you were so long, especially considering the recent leadership changes there." Marcus realized then that the industry was small and everyone knew that Julian's appointment was a joke. He spoke with a confidence he hadn't felt in years, no longer hiding his light to make a CEO's son look brighter. He detailed how he managed the compliance crisis and how he had optimized the firm's budget despite the lack of internal support. By the end of the hour, the partners weren't just offering him a job, they were offering him the Director of Operations role, a position even higher than the one he was denied. The interview wasn't just a job meeting, it was a revelation that his value was not tied to his boss's opinion. He walked out of the building into the rain, feeling lighter than he had in a decade, knowing he finally had a choice. The following Monday, the office was in a state of absolute chaos. Julian had accidentally deleted a master client database while trying to streamline the server, and the CEO was screaming in his office. Marcus walked through the frantic bullpen with a calm, steady pace that felt completely out of place. He sat at his desk, opened a blank document, and typed the words he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. There was no anger in the letter, no bitterness, and no mention of the 10 years of dust he was leaving behind. He printed the single sheet of paper, walked past the Employee of the Month plaques, and knocked on the CEO's door. "Not now, Marcus. We're in the middle of a disaster," Mr. Sterling shouted without looking down from his monitor. "This is part of the disaster, sir," Marcus said quietly, placing the white envelope directly over the CEO's shaking hands. Mr. Sterling read the letter, and the color drained from his face as he realized the safety net was officially retiring. "You can't leave now. Julian needs you to restore the files. I'll give you a 5% raise," the CEO pleaded. Marcus looked at Julian, who was staring at his keyboard in silent, helpless embarrassment. "I'm not leaving because of the money, sir," Marcus replied, feeling the heavy weight of the wall finally crumble. "I'm leaving because I finally realized that my loyalty was a debt I no longer owe to this family." He didn't wait for a counteroffer or a goodbye. He simply turned around and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed on the 12th floor, Marcus felt a surge of electricity. The resignation letter
wasn't an end, but a declaration of independence. Six months had passed since Marcus stepped out of the elevator for the last time. He stood in his new office at Apex Consulting, which featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's skyline. As the new director of operations, he was no longer a fixer hiding in the shadows. He was a leader who was encouraged to shine. His team was diverse, hungry, and, most importantly, promoted based on the quality of their work rather than their last names. One afternoon, while browsing a business news site, Marcus saw a small headline about his former firm. The company had been acquired by a larger conglomerate after a series of operational failures and a massive loss of key clients. Mr. Sterling had been forced into early retirement, and Julian was reportedly no longer in the industry. Marcus felt no joy in their failure, but he felt a profound sense of validation for his own choice. He realized that the 10 years he spent behind the Nepotism Wall weren't wasted. They were a long, difficult masterclass in resilience. He had learned that you cannot build a permanent home in a place that only sees you as a temporary tool. Marcus picked up his coffee, no longer needing the extra sugar to survive the morning, and turned back to his desk. He had a meeting in 5 minutes to discuss the promotion of a young analyst who had been working extra hard lately. As he walked toward the conference room, Marcus smiled, knowing that under his watch, the ladder would always be steady for those willing to climb. The view from the top was beautiful, but the knowledge that he had earned his way there was even better.
And that brings us to the end of The Nepotism Wall. Marcus's story reminds us that while we can't always control the walls others build in front of us, we can always control our own excellence and where we choose to take it. I hope this story gave you some perspective on handling workplace dilemmas and, more importantly, helped you pick up some high-level English vocabulary. Don't forget to check the description box for all the vocabulary used in the story. Before you go, I have a question for you. Have you ever dealt with a Julian in your professional life? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you found this story helpful for your English journey, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories and lessons. Thank you for watching. Keep practicing, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye.